welcome and hello to the new faces. ROP is a network of over 70 autonomous volunteer-run groups in rural and small-town Oregon, organizing for human dignity and democracy. Our mission is to strengthen the goals, skills, resources, and vision of human dignity groups with the goal of keeping these groups vibrant and a source for just democracy. Our staff organizers support and build the capacity of our human dignity groups so that they can continue to make change for their communities for the long haul. We're recording tonight so that we can have this training as a resource to use in the future. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, welcome. Just a little context on why we're holding this call tonight. This month is Black August, and the Movement for Black Lives has been focusing this month on one of their multiple core demands, which is to end the war on Black people. And we encourage everyone here to go to m4bl.org to read more about their demands, policy platforms, and sign up for the Black National Convention that's coming up, broadcast live on August 28th, 4 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Mountain Time. And here in rural Oregon, local organizers are taking part in this national uprising across our state. And folks have been experiencing serious pushback from local law enforcement and from counter-protesters. Police and sheriffs have been arresting organizers and their families. They've been intimidating and encouraging vigilantes to intimidate protesters, and ignoring calls for help when activists or organizers have been faced with threats and violence from counter-protesters. And I'm sure many of you on this call have experienced that, and that's why you're here. We've also seen ICE detaining and deporting community members in increasingly violent displays of force. And we know that these fights are connected, not in the least because Black immigrants are disproportionately detained and deported by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In Bend 2 weeks ago, where I'm based, we saw local law enforcement breaking state law by actively collaborating with ICE during the detention of 2 community members. And we also saw Black Lives Matter protesters actively collaborating with immigrant justice advocates in this beautiful display of solidarity and support for these 2 people that were separated from their families. Hundreds of people surrounded 2 ICE buses and called attention to the injustice that was happening. And while we wish we didn't need to have this conversation, we're really excited to be here and holding space together with organizers from across the state, because we know that as our movements grow stronger, we're going to continue to face harsh pushback, whether that's from local police or federal agents or from vigilantes. So tonight, for folks that are new to Zoom, there's a chat box where you can participate, and there's also going to be lots of time to unmute yourself and speak up, ask questions, give comments. So at the bottom of your screen, if you're on a computer, there should be a box that says chat. If you don't see it, there's a button with 3 dots that says more, and then you should be able to find the chat. If you're on a tablet of any sort, that bar is probably at the top of your screen. And I don't see anybody on the phone, but if anybody is calling in with phone audio, you're gonna have to press *6 to unmute yourself and to mute yourself. If you're on a computer or a tablet, there's a mute button on that same menu bar where the chat box is. Dancer, do you want to introduce our presenter?
Yes, I'd like to introduce Cassia Rutledge, a member of the Portland chapter of the National Lawyers Guild and a Capitol Defender. When the March for Our Lives inspired youth across Oregon to take direct action in mass in 2018, Cassia collaborated with us to do a similar training, and we're very grateful for her to share information with us tonight. We also have Claire Fawcett from Immigration Legal Services to help answer questions that come up around the consequences of interacting with local police, community members who don't have U.S. citizenship. And we encourage you to ask questions, and we thank you both for being with us tonight. And I'll just kick it to Cassia to kick us off.
Hello, hello. I'm excited to be here. Was it really 2 years ago that the last time we did one of these? Whoa, time moves so weird right now. As mentioned, my name is Cassia Rutledge. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a defense attorney in Portland, but actually all over the state right now. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I've got a case down in Roseburg. I'm originally from Kansas and moved out here for law school. So rule organizing is a very important part of my background and my heart. And I'm excited to be here with y'all. Claire, do you want to just jump in and say things when you have you want to wave or something when you want to jump in? Okay.
I've never done this before, so I'm also happy to just, at the end give a short talk about ICE if that works better, and if anybody has questions about that as well as we go along, feel free.
Yay. I like being interactive. This is always weird to me, like staring at people who I'm trying to figure out if you think I'm funny or if you don't think I'm funny or if you're, worried, I don't know. So please be interactive, unmute yourself, give thumbs up or thumbs down or look confused. Any of those things are helpful to me because this is such a weird artificial environment. So I want to start out by saying that unequivocally Black Lives Matter. And they don't matter in the law. They don't matter to law enforcement. They don't matter in my profession very readily, but they should. And we are working all together in solidarity to make them matter. And along with that, today, it's always important to me to start Know Your Rights trainings with an understanding of positionality. And what I mean by that is I'm a white cis woman with academic and educational privilege. So my interactions with law enforcement are very different than a person who's a trans man or a Black person, right? I have a very different relationship. And all of the information that we're going to talk about tonight are what the law says you can do and should do. But nothing I'm telling you can promise to keep you safe from law enforcement, because we know that law enforcement doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them if you're breaking the law. It doesn't matter if you're following the law. It doesn't matter if you're running or if you're staying still. Nothing folks of color can do is going to keep them safe from law enforcement. None of my rights, the rights that we're telling you today, are going to help with that. But what they can help with, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is the long-term violence that happens to people when they get involved in the criminal justice system. There's the short-term violence that happens when law enforcement put hands on people, take them to jail for the night, physically assault or shoot people. And then there's a long-term violence that happens when people get wrapped up in probations and criminal cases and Measure 11 charges and all of these things. Knowing your rights can help with that. We're also going to talk specifically more about protester rights as well, because there's some important nuances with that. Okay, let me think about the front end stuff. So, yeah. I will try my best to tell you about what the legal piece is and then reality, because after being a public defender for 13 years, I know that reality does not look like what it looks like in the books. So if you have questions as we go, please unmute yourself and jump in, or chat, or raise your hand, or do something, because it's much better if we're interactive. Sound okay so far? Okay. So let's just start out with some basic Know Your Rights, and then we'll go into protester stuff. There are 3 types of interactions that you can have with law enforcement. The first type is called mere conversation. What do you all think mere conversation means? Somebody unmute themselves. I'm going to force you to be interactive.
Casual talking.
Okay. Yep. Other things people think mere conversation is. What does that sound like to folks?
Mirroring back what the person is saying.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I think it sounds like a trap.
Yes. There's the punchline right there. You're right about that. For people who didn't hear, that person just said it sounds like a trap. Yes.
I would
So
say it's probably any conversation you have with them when you're not under arrest.
Yeah, pretty close. There's actually one more step in between, but yes, very, very close. So mere conversation is the way police engage with you when they don't seem to have any reason to engage with you. This can be like standing on the sidewalk and you are crossing the street and a police officer's or a cop is standing next to you waiting to cross the street also. And they're like, hey, really long red light, right? Like that's mere conversation. It's chit chat, it's small talk, it's whatever. And or it could be like I didn't tell you all this. I teach a high school class. It's a dual class at Portland State, but at Roosevelt High School. And so a lot of times cops come up to my students at games and they're like, "Ooh, do you think Roosevelt's gonna win?" Like mere conversation. Seems innocuous, seems innocent, right? But it typically isn't. Whoever said it was a trap, it can be a gateway for them to engage in further conversation with you, try and make you feel like they're comfortable and safe. And even if it isn't a trap, it is not necessary for you to engage with them if mere conversation. Actually, I just realized I skipped a very important thing that I should back up and talk about. Sorry. I have not had any coffee yet today, which sounds weird because it's like late at night, but I'm just, it's one of those days I didn't get coffee. And I do see the note in the chat about Measure 11. We'll come back to that. Okay, so first, what do I mean when I say law enforcement? Because I'm going to say cops for the rest of this just to make it easier. But when I say law enforcement, who do you think I mean?
Police, sheriffs, DAs.
Yep, police and sheriffs. DAs is a good one. Yeah, I would put DAs in there. They're not technically law enforcement. ICE is in there. Yeah, Claire.
That way.
Yeah.
Someone
else?
put DHS in the chat, Department of Homeland Security.
Yes, and actually, it's interesting. Two different types of DHS, right? DHS, Department of Homeland Security. Oregon also has a DHS, which is the Department of Human Services, which oversees child welfare. And so child welfare officers, yes, can be law enforcement.
I would also say Customs and Border Protection, because I know that everyone saw them in Bend. So they're not well known, but.
Yep. Other ones people know of?
DEA.
State troopers. Yep.
Or forest rangers and that sort.
Interesting, forest rangers. I bet you're right. I have had a couple of cases involving forest rangers. So yeah, I think you're right.
I think pretty sure they can cite you and whatnot.
Yeah. Some of the ones that people typically miss, but we're seeing more and more FBI, CIA, obviously, are law enforcement. As are school resource officers. There are several different types of security at schools, and school resource officers are, they have their DPST, which is the certification you need under the state. So they are card-carrying law officers. And then there's some people who are not exactly law enforcement, but have a special relationship with law enforcement and the laws, like LPOs, loss prevention officers at any of your major stores. They're technically not law enforcement, but they have permission under the statutes to detain people if they think crime has happened. And oftentimes they act in really insidious ways where police officers wouldn't be able to engage with somebody legally or lawfully under a certain way, but loss prevention officers or store security or security guards are able to circumvent kind of some of your constitutional protections and get you to confess to things or do things that help the cops once they show up. So yes, we've talked about all of these groups. So I'm going to shorten it to cops because otherwise it would take forever if I always said law enforcement and ICE and police and sheriffs and OSP and DHS and da-da-da. So cops. But what I mean by cops is all of those law enforcement people. So anytime that a law enforcement officer wants to talk to you, you can have a mere conversation. That's the first type. That's them just saying, wow, it's been really cold at night in Portland. What do you think about that? They don't have to have any reason to engage in mere conversation with you. They don't have to have any legal reason to approach you. They can approach you and ask any question they want that's innocuous like that. Innocuous? Nope, I'm saying that word wrong. Innocuous. There you go, I added an extra L. Innocuous for any reason that they want to. And you do not have to engage in conversation with them. You can say, I don't talk to cops. You can say, stay silent. You can move away from them. You can answer them if you want to. I typically do not suggest you answer them though, and that'll become more clear as we keep going. But a lot of times those questions are not as simple as or innocuous as they seem, because the question might turn into something like, where are you coming from? Or where are you going to? Seems like a simple question, but is actually a question that could help incriminate you. Maybe they have an idea about who you are or what you've done, or they've got a report of somebody coming from the corner of blank and blank. And if you tell them, I'm just coming from that same general direction, then you're adding information that they need in order to be able to stop you lawfully. It's one of the things I always tell people up front about police, because unless you are a Black or brown person in this country, you were most likely raised with a very skewed concept of who police officers and what police are. Black and brown communities know distinctly well who cops are. But those of us who identify as white don't learn it unless we have proximity to folks who are affected by the way cops interact. Police officers and cops almost never have the information they need on the front end to arrest you. I would say in my 13 years, of being a public defender, I represent over 3,000 people. And I would say about 80% of those folks gave the police the information they needed to arrest them. Because law enforcement is trained in how to get you to give that information up, even if you're not guilty of anything. So law enforcement asks questions of you in order for you to give them pieces of information that get them to the next level. And the next level is chat you up. You don't have to engage with them. They don't need to know anything about you. You don't have to engage, whatever. Second step, they have to have something called reasonable suspicion for, and that's for them to do a stop. In order for them to stop you, they have to have reasonable suspicion that you've either committed a crime or are about to commit a crime. What do you all think reasonable suspicion means? It's like a weird lawyer word.
It means someone with a similar training and background as you might think that there was something suspicious.
Yeah. Other thoughts on reasonable suspicion?
Is speeding reasonable suspicion?
I'm going to talk about cars in a second, because cars are a weird little own carved out thing. But
I think it's really vague, which is problematic, especially for people who are non-white or, fall into any, non-favored group as far in law enforcement's eyes.
yeah, totally true. Yeah, so reasonable suspicion is basically the cops having a hunch that later, when they sit down to write their report about why they did X, Y, and Z, they can justify with some pieces of information. And having read thousands upon thousands of police reports, those things usually start with sentences like, in my training and experience, people who have just committed crimes are nervous and don't look me in the eye. People who have just committed crimes or are thinking about committing crimes sweat. Like it's things like that. And it can be more practical, direct things like I witnessed a hand-to-hand drug transaction on the corner of blank and blank from this person to this person. It can be more than just a hunch. But reasonable suspicion means that putting yourself in that police officer's position, do they have enough to justify that? Yes, it's subjective and objective. There's a kind of a two-part test when you go to court. But that's the important part, which is in the moment, you're never going to know whether they have reasonable suspicion or not. They may not even know if they've got reasonable suspicion. Fairly often, I have had clients who, again, this is what I'm telling you, they use you to get the information they need. So I've had clients who, they'll tell me, it's not written in the police report like this. They'll say to them like, hey man, I'm just out here making sure the streets are safe. The cops will say this. If you let me just search your bag, just for officer safety, make sure everything's okay, I'll let you go home. Just let me look quickly in your bag and then we'll go home. And my client will let them look in the bag, and then they'll find like a needle kit or a gun or something. And then they'll say, now you're under arrest. And they said, you said I could go home. And it's like, well, that was before I found the gun. But now they've got to go back and justify how they had reasonable suspicion to get into the bag type thing. So reasonable suspicion is what they legally need in order to stop you. And what do you think a stop is? What is a stop?
We have a raised hand from
Oh,
George.
great. Sorry, I can't see them. So hand
George,
raiser.
unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I was just going to say I would run a lot in the South. I'm from the South. I'm from Louisiana. So the question where you're going or where you've been is always asked. But when I lived in Texas, I was driving from Atlanta back to Texas. And it was about 1 o'clock at night. And I got pulled over by a state police officer. And I was driving a Chrysler 300S at the time. And he asked me where I was coming from, where am I going, and what did I do for a living. And I told him I was a vet. And he said, you have any drugs? I said, yeah, I got hydrocodone because I got pain. I got pain. He says, okay. So he goes and searched my vehicle. And then he asked me to go sit on his vehicle because he saw my handicap placard. So that was just my little.
Yeah. Thanks for that, George. Yeah, it's when they're asking those questions, whether it's in person or at a traffic stop, it's because they're searching for stuff, right? Cops don't really care too much about pulling people over for speeding or failing to signal 50 feet from the intersection. They're really hoping to pull you over, you're gonna have a warrant, your car's not gonna be registered, they're gonna smell weed coming out of the car, that there's gonna be something else that comes from that traffic stop. And they do what's called pretext traffic stops, which basically that means we're pulling you over because you're black or brown, and we all know that that's why we're pulling you over, but we get to invent a reason as to why we're gonna say that we're pulling you over. Like, you failed to signal 500 feet from the intersection, or 50 feet, whatever it is, or you exceeded the speed limit.
I was just going to add that it's very similar for ICE officers. And in fact, a lot of people get stopped because they run when an ICE officer shows up in a location, which is a normal reaction for anybody with a police officer or an ICE officer, whether or not the person's undocumented or whether or not the person has committed a crime. So that's a lot of times the ICE officers show up looking for one person that they specifically actually have a warrant for. But that person, the description that they have, for instance, might be middle-aged Latino man. Now, how many people could meet that description? And then if you add running to that, or even if that person says, like, I don't know why you're arresting me, whatever, they use that as reasonable suspicion, and they'll ask people similarly. They'll ask people, where are you from? They'll use the person's race or where they're located, or the fact that they're running away to arrest them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My experience has been that reasonable suspicion is anything that they say. I mean, you have no defense. It's reasonable suspicion because they say that they are suspicious. The only real way out of it is not to say anything at all. You just avoid them. You don't have anything to do with them.
Yeah, thanks for the information, Gerald. I mean, the hard part is a lot of folks of color don't get a chance to not have interactions with law enforcement. And if you're going to engage in protesting, you're probably going to also engage with law enforcement. So as much as it would be nice. Oh, go ahead, George.
I just want to comment on what Mr. Gerald said. we don't have the luxury to say nothing. We have to respond. It's not like, oh, I don't want to talk to you. Then at that point, they will apprehend us, tell us to get out the car and apprehend us because we're not cooperating. So when you hear people say, well, don't run or cooperate with the policeman, she's telling you what we have our rights in right now, but because they have whatever authority they think they have, they use it as a scare tactic in order for us to do something so they can write in their report why they did it.
Yes, you're right.
Then I guess I need the answer to that is how do you avoid reasonable suspicion? I mean, it looks like it's almost in violation of your First Amendment right. Because if you say you have the right to say something, but if you say anything, it's turned into suspicion.
Yeah. Two things. We're going to get there. I'm going to tell you exactly what you should and should not say. So it's coming. Stay tuned. Like that's like what is that? Cliff Notes. And you're right, George. And thanks for bringing us back to that piece, which is the things I'm telling you are what the law says and what our rights should be and what white people can claim for ourselves. And it's very different based on your positionality, right? Like how I would interact with a law enforcement officer and you would interact with a law enforcement officer are different. And I am not giving you practical advice on how, nothing I'm saying is gonna be able to help with that safety piece, because we just got to dismantle and defund the whole police system. But that's, that's what we're working on right now. But, I had some students of mine, I gave a Know Your Rights training to my students and their parents. And one of the parents said, I just need you to tell me what I can do to keep my Black kid safe. And I was like, I mean, it was the hardest question that anybody has ever asked me in my practice. And I don't have an answer. I don't have a short-term answer for that. Okay, go ahead, Claire.
Oh, I was just going to say similarly, like, I think really what you said about the short term versus the long term. And I was going to use the example of a person who was arrested collaterally. The ICE went to his apartment complex looking for somebody who had some sort of criminal conviction. He matched the description of the guy because they only had a racial and age description, which is very general. And they arrested him. He was roughed up by them. That's a very minimizing term. His shoulder was dislocated. They denied him medical care. It was a horrible situation for him. He was placed in proceedings, but when he was placed in proceedings, because he didn't say anything to them about his country of origin, where he was from, the attorney was then able to get his case thrown out of the court because they didn't have any evidence at the end of the day. So I think we're going to get there, but I just wanted to provide that example that, like, what you were saying about the short term, it didn't prevent the arrest. It didn't prevent him from getting hurt during the arrest or the resulting trauma that he's going to have. But the fact that he didn't tell them anything ended up preventing him from being in that long-term deportation proceeding.
Yes, thank you. That was a really useful example because, all of the things on the front end that I'm telling you, you're still going to get arrested, most likely. If the cops want to arrest you, they're still going to take you to the station. They're still going to fingerprint you. You're still going to sit in jail that night. In fact, it may make it even slightly more likely that you're going to spend the night in jail if you enforce all of your rights on the front end. But then when the district attorney's office, depending on who your district attorney is and how ethical they are, gets the file, they may say, oh, this was a bad search because they didn't actually have reasonable suspicion or probable cause. And even if they still charge it, so they could dismiss it, but even if they still charge it, then when your attorney gets it, we do like a little attorney happy dance, which is not a thing you want to see because attorneys can't dance. But we do a little happy dance because we're like, I can totally fight this. So it is the long-term battle that enforcing your rights helps with. And then there's a bigger picture too of why you enforce your rights. And I get this question a lot when I do trainings. People say, well, if I don't have anything to hide, why would I tell them to, F off, which is not what I'm going to tell you to say, but, shorthand. Why would I tell the officers, no, you can't come into my house, no, you can't whatever, if I don't have anything to hide? And there's a whole bunch of reasons why you should still enforce your rights, even if you don't think you're guilty. One, because it helps model it for other people. Everybody, we know the way that bystander situations work, that everybody's kind of waiting for somebody else to do the right thing. We know that everybody's waiting on the one person to jump in and start acting. And if you are the one person who says, no, I'm not talking to you and I don't consent to any searches, then that can create a chain reaction that makes it possible for people who have less power and privilege around you to also do it, because they're not the ones who are having to start the conversation about why we're not talking to cops today. So you can use your power and privilege in order to start that conversation. Two, interestingly enough, my clients, who are all people who, not all people, but a lot of them violated pieces of the law, broke into people's houses, hurt other folks, stole things. The only reason that all of us have protections from police officers for rights to search against search and seizure, the only reason we all have rights is because my clients broke the law. So the only way that we make law is when people do things that violate the law and then challenge it. Because if, for example, if a police officer came into my house right now, I'm going to say there's nothing illegal in my house. But if a police officer came into my house right now and they arrested me and then we went to court, they would dismiss the charge, or I would most likely win at some point because I've done nothing wrong. And then nothing happens. There's no case law made. Nobody gets more protected because I was arrested wrongfully. It's my clients who are arrested who actually create all of our laws for us. So we owe them a debt of gratitude, and we can help by enforcing our rights. And two more reasons. Three, innocent people are charged with crimes all the time. I've represented multiple innocent people who have been faced charges, including up to murder. 4, the cops break the law more often than we do, and they should be held to account for that. And then 5, and then I'll get off my little soapbox and get back on track. Another reason we should all enforce our rights is you don't actually know what all the laws are. And I'll give you a good example of this, which is a Chicanx power organization kind of modeled off of some Black Panther movements. And one of the guys at the Brown Berets kind of was pushing back the whole time, like, why do I need to know this information? I don't break the law. I make sure I always follow the law. But the Brown Berets have a uniform that they wear, including a sash with a knife in it. And at the very end of the training, he said something to me about like, oh yeah, I heard something saying that I can't carry a knife like this. And he lifts up his shirt and he's got a concealed knife tucked into his waistband. And he was the whole time breaking the law. He had no idea that concealed knife was actually illegal and would have gotten him stopped and charged with a felony conviction, potentially a felony, for the concealment of that weapon. And add on top of that he is a brown man, substantially increases the risks for him, right? So just because you think you may not be breaking the law, you may be. So that's my soapbox over here. Going back to the 3 pieces. So first type of interaction with cops is mere conversation. They don't have to have any reason to do it. You don't have to talk back to them. Second is a stop. And a stop is when they substantially interfere with your freedom of movement. So a stop could be them saying, hey, you come here. It could be show me your hands. It could be sit your ass down. It could be get out of the car. It could be that you walking down the street and them pulling up in front of you and blocking your path. There's court cases that say show of force, putting hand on weapon or unholstering weapon by the police officers could be a show of force. So anything that they do that interferes with your freedom of movement, where you as a reasonable person doesn't feel like you can just walk off and disregard them, that is when they're stopping you. I said something, I was going to come back to cars, and this is a good time to come back to cars. Cars are like a weird situation. Cars in Oregon are not subject to quite the same rules if you're driving a vehicle. And the reason for that is cars are considered to be like a privilege that you have. So if you take advantage of the privilege of being able to drive your car on the roads, then you've already made certain agreements with the government. One of them is going to be that you're going to get have a license and insurance for your vehicle, and you're going to show it upon stop. Another one is that if they suspect you of driving under the influence of intoxicants, you will consent to field sobriety tests and a blow test. There's certain things that it's a separate agreement you've entered into with the government that you didn't even probably know that that's what you were doing, but that's what driving is. So one of those things is when you get pulled over by a law enforcement, even though all of us understand that that's a stop, right? Because nobody'd be like, I don't think I really have to stop. I think I could just keep going with this cop behind me with their lights on. It's not technically a legal stop. It's weird. So you do have to pull over for them, and you do have to show driver's license and insurance. You don't have to show that information to them, but they can give you a ticket for not giving that information. But so that alone is not a legal stop. But when they pull you over, they have a very limited time period and a frame of questions they can ask you related to the stop itself. So if they pulled you over because you were speeding, they can't then ask you questions about whether you grow marijuana at your house illegally or whatever. They have a very narrow window that they're supposed to be able to ask you about. And they're not supposed to create any what are called unavoidable lulls. They're not allowed to keep you there longer than they need. And again, they do a lot of these things in really racist and BS ways. For example, I had a client once, a Black man who got off work late at night, pulled over his car on the side of the road just to chill before he went from his house to his home. And about 4 unmarked gang enforcement cars pulled up to approach him, and the justification in the police report, the reason they stopped him was because he was parked more than a foot from the curb. Right, like that doesn't pass the sniff test, but that's what they wrote in the police report as their pretext reason for pulling him over. But so a stop is having your freedom of movement interfered with. In order for a cop to interfere to stop you, they need something higher than reasonable suspicion. They need probable cause that you have committed or about to commit a crime. Probable cause is like 51% is what we say in the law, and that's a total not useful percentage. It's like not helpful. Like, what does that mean? It means that when they sit down and write their police report later, they're going to be able to justify why it is that they stopped you, pulled you over. Lost my train of thought for a second. So they need, that's for to elevate from a stop to an arrest is probable cause that you've committed a crime. Let me give you this example. Let's say somebody's sitting in a parking lot at a mall. They're dressed all in black, wearing a hoodie, black hoodie, have gloves on. And they keep walking up to the window of a jewelry store and kind of peering into the jewelry store, looking in, going back to their car, waiting 10 minutes, doing it again. Who here thinks let's stay with reasonable suspicion. Who here thinks it's reasonable suspicion for a cop to stop that person and ask them what they're doing? Or make an argument for it? Okay. Why? Let me say why.
Because it's odd.
Okay.
Because a cop, in their experience, could argue that that's someone casing a place to rob.
Okay. Who says no, that's not enough to stop and ask that person what they're doing? George. Yeah. George's the only person. No, I'm kidding. I only see half of you, so. Make an argument for why that's not no reasonable suspicion to stop somebody.
I'd say that based on the weather, a person could be wearing all of those things, and maybe their friend works inside, and there's totally reasonable reasons why that's just normal behavior.
Yeah, in this particular case, you are right, Mike. This was not reasonable suspicion to stop. The person was actually waiting for their partner to get off work. They worked in the jewelry store. It was cold, you know. The interesting thing about reasonable suspicion though, is that police officers don't have to consider reasonable alternatives to their theory. So police are allowed to put A plus B plus C together in whatever order they want it to be. And then if that seems reasonable to them and they can justify that in court, that's enough. But other alternatives that they didn't consider, they don't have to consider for reasonable suspicion. But all of these things we fight out later. Like whether or not it was reasonable for a cop to stop that person gets fought out in front of a judge months later in court. So in the moment, you're never going to know if they have reasonable suspicion to stop you. They probably don't even know if they have reasonable suspicion to stop you. So then but in order to arrest you, which is the third type of interaction you can have with law enforcement, they have to have probable cause that you have committed or are about to commit a crime. And to do that, they typically do a very good job about getting you to confess or give that information up. And so what that looks like is typically them saying like, I'm gonna get out of your car, I'm gonna pat you down. Or pop your trunk, it's commands. Or open your bag for me or your purse for me. Or I'm coming in. They don't ask questions. Law enforcement has to go under lots of hours of training every year to maintain their certificate to be a law enforcement officer. And the vast majority of those trainings are on how to get people to comply with your orders. They're not like how to de-escalate, they're not whatever. They're trained in what's called the read technique, which is a technique to get people to confess to things that they have not done. There's a whole bunch of training that they undergo about how to intimidate you into confessing or how to get you to comply. So for example, one of the tricks that they play, and all of these are legal, we'll talk about it too. You all know what Miranda warnings are? Anybody not know? Okay, so a Miranda warning is the thing that police officers, you see on TV a lot, they say, you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against a court of law. Anything you have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one be appointed to represent you. Those are your Miranda warnings. That's because some dude whose last name was Miranda got pulled over a long time ago in Texas, and he was like, wait, don't they have to tell me what my rights are? Again, my clients are the ones who protect all of us. That's the theme, which is not how you thought about people who had been convicted of crimes prior to this evening, probably. But so everybody thinks the cops have to read you Miranda warnings. They don't have to read you Miranda warnings. Cops only have to give you your Miranda warnings if they want to use your statements against you. So the only reason that they read them to you is because you have said something useful to them and they want to use that information against you. If you, for example, were caught shoplifting in a store, they've got it on video, they've got 2 loss prevention officers who watched you steal the stuff, your mom came in and watched the video and was like, that's my child, they found the thing on you, right? Like, and also if that's your mom, come on mom. But all of those things, then they don't need you to confess against yourself, so they're not gonna probably read you Miranda warnings. But one of the things that they will do fairly often is put you into custody and say, man, we got you dead to rights. You did blank, blank, and blank, and blank. And you'll talk to them. You'll say, yeah, I did that. I was really hungry, and so I stole, or I don't know, I've been using, or whatever it is that you say. So they've got that information. Then they'll have another cop come up to you later and be like, I've got to read you your Miranda rights. Did my partner do that? I don't think they did. Okay, so here's your Miranda rights. You have right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you, da, 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 da. So you said that you're using, and that's why you stole today. And so now they have Mirandized you. So the things that you say afterwards, they can use against you. And in your brain, you're like, yeah, why are they asking me? I already told them all of these things, but none of that stuff prior to the Miranda warnings they could use against you. So there are things like that they're trained in how to get you to do and don't make sense to you because you're like, why is this cop asking me this again? Which is why we're not going to talk to them which is the next stage. George, I see your questions in here and I'll get to them. I'm not ignoring you, I promise. So 3 types of interactions with cop: mere conversation, stop, and arrest. An arrest is when they formally initiate charges against you. They put you in handcuffs, they take you to the station. An arrest is, they've decided to elevate this thing. You can be arrested and not go to the police station, because an arrest is a legal term. So sometimes they'll do what's called cite in lieu, which is they'll give you a cite to show up in court on some date in the future. You've technically been arrested and given a citation, but you just may not have been placed in handcuffs or taken to the station. Any questions about that front part before I tell you what to say and what not to say? Okay, we doing okay? Everybody still awake? This helpful-ish? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So really, there's only 3 things you need to say to cops. First thing is, if you feel like an officer is stopping you or arresting you, is a question, which is, officer, am I free to go? You've probably heard this before. Now, why do we ask them a question? And the answer is, the reason we ask them this question, officer, am I free to go, is because in an ideal world, in the magical world that is not in existence, the law enforcement officer would say, why, yes, kind person, you are free to go. Thanks for clarifying. Or they would say, well, no, I would like to investigate you further. But they're not going to do that, right? That's not reality. What they'll say is, when you say, officer, am I free to go? They're going to say, whoa, somebody went to law school, huh? What law school did you go to? You get your JD? That's what you got? You got your JD, huh? Or they'll say, man, I was just trying, I don't know why you're escalating. I was just trying to make this easy, and now you're escalating this. Or they'll be like, oh, this one thinks they're smart. This, whatever it is, right? They're gonna do everything they can to not answer that question, because the real answer is they are gonna try and get you to give them evidence so that they can move to the next step, and they need time and your attention to do that. They don't have it right now. And if they had to be honest, they would have to say, right now, I don't have reasonable suspicion to continue detaining you. I'm trying to develop that reasonable suspicion. So I just need to make you more uncomfortable. So that's me what I need to do to have the reasonable suspicion to arrest you. That's really what's happening, is they are delaying and getting you uncomfortable so that they can have you give evidence against yourself.
Okay.
But if you just say, officer, my free to, sorry.
I guess that I'm a little bit confused about the difference between a stop
Mhm.
and detainment and an arrest. And it sounds like it starts with, suspicion, and they go to probable cause, and then they think they have some evidence or something that allows them to arrest you. Because is there some way to simply tell me, where does one start and where does the next one begin?
The easiest way is, are you in a police car? And it's not 100% safe of a rule. Are you in a police car handcuffed heading to a station? If you are, you have been arrested. If you are sitting at a place, maybe you're in handcuffs, maybe you're in the police car, but you're not physically going someplace, then you've probably been detained. A detainment can end, and detain and stop is the same thing. If you have been stopped or detained, that interaction could lead in not going to a police station, or not facing charges, not getting a ticket. But it is the investigatory part of how officers get to the arrest.
And I think that it is confusing. I mean, I've seen this with ICE officers. I was just going to add that it's confusing whether you are being detained or stopped or you're not, because once there's that engagement, most people aren't going to walk away from a police officer or a DHS officer, an ICE officer, just by virtue of the fact that they're a law enforcement officer, right? So that's kind of the trick that they're playing on you, is that you don't, unless you affirmatively ask and get an answer, you don't know if you can walk away or not.
Right.
And so then, I think it's probably a little bit more clear once you're arrested, but the line between, conversation and stop and being detained is really, really blurry. And I think that's purposeful on their part.
Yep. Which is why we suggest that you ask the question, not believing that they're going to give you an honest answer, at least not in the beginning. They're probably not going to be like, yes, you are free to go, right? They could say that. But more likely what's going to happen is you're going to say, officer, am I free to go? And they're going to mock you or, like, I just need you to sit down and be quiet right now, or whatever it is. They're not going to give you an answer to the question, in which case you ask the question again. Officer, am I free to go? Well, I just need you to sit down and officer, am I free to go? I suggest just keep asking this question, and the answer will become clear at some point. And the way it's going to become clear is they're either going to be like, yeah, get your ass out of here. Like, I don't want to see you again. Get out of here. Or they're going to say something like, no, you're not free to go. Sit your butt down. In which case, we have gone through step one. Aaron, you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I was going to suggest maybe thinking about a stop as something that is time sensitive. A stop does have a time limit before it becomes further or before you are free to go. So arrest is kind of, the final step. And thinking about a stop is kind of start the clock of the interaction, and it ends one way or another, but that's kind of where the clock starts.
Yeah. And how long that is, it can vary. Like, if they're going to go get police dogs, for example, or they're getting a warrant or something, it's going to take some more time. But stops typically are fairly short in duration. They should be short in duration. So first thing is, officer, am I free to go? Repeat the question until you have some sort of semblance of a clear answer. Because as Claire said, people don't feel comfortable just walking away. One of the things that's interesting, and I would love to have Claire weigh in on this as well, is Oregon, like I told you, cars are weird, and Oregon has some special things that make us different than other places. One of the interesting parts about Oregon law is if you are a passenger in a vehicle, so say your sister is driving your vehicle or a vehicle and you're the passenger, and the police officers, the cops pull your sister over who's driving. You as a passenger are free to go. Not stop you as the passenger. They have only stopped the driver unless they have a specific reason to have stopped you as well. Like they come up to the window, and they say, we saw you flick a cigarette out, passenger, so stay where you're at. You theoretically, as the passenger, can open up the car door and walk away. I've told my clients this, and I had one client. It's important that when you walk away, you still continue to abide by the law, because I had a client once who did this very thing. His cousin was driving. He got stopped by the cousin got stopped. My client got out of the car because he knew he had a gun on him. He should not have a gun on him. And he walked into a 7-Eleven. So far, so good. Proud of him. Happy he followed my advice. And then he went and he dropped the gun into what happened to be empty trash can, made a big loud thud. It was also on video. And so then the police officers had reasonable suspicion and probable cause to arrest him. I was like, dude, just if you would have kept walking down the street, you would have been good. So he followed the first part, but not the second part. And I say that because I've heard some immigration folks, and which I want Claire to weigh in, suggest that perhaps people who may have immigration concerns are passengers in vehicles and not drivers in vehicles. And so if your parent is not present in the United States with documentation, that you could drive and then they could just walk. I mean, not that law enforcement should not be asking them for information, but also it's positional.
I don't know the technical answer to that, whether you would be, what I can say is, like, police officers should not be enforcing immigration law. They do sometimes call ICE when they arrest somebody. What I will say is that often things get really muddled because ICE officers pose as police and stop people that way. I mean, it's like the Wild West of I don't know like how to even describe it, but like just somebody described it as you're going to traffic court for like a death penalty case. Like it's, so these officers just do crazy things, and they do stop people and pose as the police. And what I would recommend is you act as if they were the police. I don't think I would recommend that people without documents walk away immediately without asking first whether they are also free to leave, because if you do, that could be seen as reasonable suspicion to stop you because you're walking away because you're afraid of ICE arresting you if you find out that it's ICE. So that would just be my, you know, my 2 cents, but I don't know if they could arrest you under that circumstance.
And then Kyle,
And
I
if
think
it-
you've got your hand up. Oh, sorry.
If it is ICE and the driver is documented, then they would have to have a judicial warrant to question anybody else in the car, right?
Well, so go ahead.
Well, ICE officers technically have to have a warrant to arrest. You know, they have to show you a warrant to enter any sort of like property or anything like that they have, and they're supposed to have a warrant to arrest that person, whoever they're arresting in that house. But then as soon as they get any sort of probable cause, right, to a reasonable suspicion and then probable cause to arrest anybody else, they will do it. So it's kind of, I mean, I don't know what we advise people when they're in their houses and ICE comes and knocks on the door and they said that, you know, they're searching for whoever, is to ask for a warrant signed by a judge that gives them the ability to arrest that person or enter the home before ever opening up the door. But, you know, a lot of times they also carry, for instance, they carry a piece of paper that they just slip under the door and it's not the warrant to mislead people. So they open the door, so the ICE officer comes in, they arrest the person they were there to arrest, and then they arrest anybody else that they want to, because that person runs away from them or whatever it is.
I was about to ask, like, how do you verify a warrant if they say they have one?
It should be signed by a judge. So it should.
How do you know it's a judge?
There are ones that they make up, and then the ones that are actually signed by a judge. And so someplace here in Portland, at least, made a little know your rights to go on the back of your door that have what an actual magistrate signed warrant looks like under ICE and what don't. I can try and find that and send it to folks.
That would be great. That's awesome. Didn't know it existed. And I also just wanted to say Aaron's here too, and he's also from ICS. So Aaron, if you have anything to add at any point, please do.
And then Kyle, I think I saw your hand raised a while ago.
Yeah, I would imagine a real warrant would have some kind of like impression stamp on it. I've never had an actual warrant before, but so I don't know. But from the passenger in a car thing, does the passenger have any rights if they just stay in the car and don't say anything? Because getting out of the car while the cop's there is like a good way to get shot, it seems like.
Yeah, you don't have to leave. That's a good point. You don't have to leave the vehicle, and you have all of the same rights. Like, you don't have to engage with police. Sometimes they'll ask the passenger for their license and insurance. You don't have to give it to them. You are a passenger in a vehicle. It's also important to note, and I know there is an immigration caveat here, so I'll pause for that at the end, that in Oregon, you do not need to identify yourself to law enforcement. We are not a state that requires you to carry identification and provide it to law enforcement. You should never lie to the cops about your name or your date of birth or your address, because that is a crime if you are doing it to avoid them, you know, stopping you, arresting you, or serving a warrant. But so a cop asks you your name and you don't want to give your name, you don't have to give your name, even if you're a driver of a vehicle. It's going to slow some things down for you because they also have a right to figure out who you are. That may take you to the station. But as a passenger in a car, you do not need to talk to cops. You can just sit there. And again, talking about cop tricks, I have had them do something where they pull over a car thinking the driver's intoxicated. They arrest the driver, and then they say, we're going to tow the car unless you, passenger, can drive this car. Show me your ID. So they show them their ID. Then the passenger gets into the driver's seat, pulls off, and they arrest them for driving under the influence. So,
I have a
did that
question.
answer your question well enough? Yeah, go ahead.
I was on the school board, and I know this is not a stop question, but we were advised that we have the ability to allow ICE agents onto the school grounds, and the only thing they could not do is ask to see the child's file. But other than that, they had permission to ask the child questions and so forth. But because the attorney who worked at OSBA, she wasn't a, immigration lawyer, she didn't really know. So that's a question I have.
As far as I know, it's similar to the cops, and they can ask you anything they want to ask you. You don't have to answer. So we generally advise that people say, I'm exercising my right to remain silent, and especially never answer anything about your country of origin. So that's what I would say about that. ICE has appeared at schools, at courthouses, both, criminal courtrooms and places where they're doing family and custody hearings. So unfortunately, they are present in a lot of different locations. But as far as, I don't think that they could, I think that's right. They couldn't ask for a child's file because that's the school's property. And I believe they would have to have a search warrant to ask for that. But as far as asking any person questions, it's like a cop can ask anybody questions.
And Claire, just to clarify, that includes children that are underage without a parent present or any sort of guardian.
I haven't had that situation. So to be honest, I don't know. It happens to unaccompanied minors at the border, but that's not a school situation. So I don't know. I wouldn't know what to answer. I'll have to research that and get back to everybody. But that's a really good point.
George, this is a little bit outside of Know Your Rights, but we do work with school districts that are figuring out ways to keep their students as safe as possible. And I'd love to get you connected with other people that are thinking about how to keep people safe in that way.
Oh, thank you. I live in Blue River, so the McKinsey School, we're way out there. So there is traffic that comes through. So we just want to make sure that our kids are safe and their parents are safe. So I'm just trying to get information so I can pass it along.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's definitely connect.
Yeah, I'll George, I'll try to research that. I feel like I'm really impressed with this Know Your Rights because I've dealt with situations, but it's hard that I haven't dealt with every hypothetical that there is. Like these hypotheticals about the officers coming into school, what could they ask the children, what couldn't they ask the children? So it's a good point that they're minors, and I'm going to look into it and get back to you all. Thank you for the question.
And from a criminal defense perspective, not an immigration perspective, these rights apply to anybody regardless of age. So a 12-year-old can enforce their rights to remain silent. If school resource officers, also known as cops inside of schools, pull them aside, they can say, I'm not talking without my lawyer and my guardian. So these rights don't just start at age 18 in terms of criminal stuff.
And I would say the same, I would say the same, like they can always say they don't want to talk. Yeah. The question I'm thinking of is whether there are special privileges for the children that the ICE officers can't speak with them without some sort of permission. And I don't know the answer to that question.
Does that also apply to kids who are foster kids? Because we get a lot of kids from Portland from the system to our schools, and we have a lot of foster parents up here. And how are their rights? Because I don't know the relationship between what their guardians can do and allow, and what they have the right to say and what right to do, because they're on that program.
In terms of criminal stuff, it changes nothing. They still have the right to say, I'm not talking to cops. I'm not consenting to searches. None of that changes that.
And it's the same with immigration.
Okay, so first thing you say to cops is, am I free to go? And you keep doing it until you get an answer or it becomes clear to you. And again, that answer is probably going to look something more like sit your butt down, or now you've pissed me off, so now I'm going to arrest you, something like that. Or it's going to look like get your butt out of here, I'm tired of looking at your face, something like that. The second thing you say to officers is, I do not consent to any searches. And it's important to say this because you may not even know you're being searched, because what a search looks like is officer patting you down, the outside of your clothes down. A search is open up your trunk for me, or hey, mind if I step inside your house, or any of those things. So you have a right to tell the officers that you are not consenting to searches. And it's important that you do this clearly and loudly and just keep saying it, because there are only 3 ways that cops can search your things. 1, if you give them permission to search, and you can give them permission by just not objecting to it. So if you don't, if they're like, hey, pop your trunk for me, and you pop your trunk, then you've given them permission to search. If you, say if they say step outside of the car here, I'm going to pat you down, okay? And you're like, okay, that's a consent to a search. So you need to say, I do not consent to any searches. They're still going to search you. It's not saying that it's not going to prevent them from stopping searching you. They're still pulling you out of the car. They're still looking in your trunk. It doesn't protect you in the short term. But again, this is the difference between the short term and the long term. But what it does is it means that the cop, so there's 3 ways of cops getting into your things. You give them permission. If they have a warrant, which in my 13 years as a criminal defense lawyer, the last 5-6 years have been only major felonies, which is when they would use warrants. I've only seen a handful of warrants because they're a pain in the butt to go get. The cop has to write this whole thing about why in their training experience they think they're going to find this thing in this spot. It has to be very deep. Judge up in the middle of the night to get the thing signed. It's got to be perfect, and it's a very easily attackable thing. Every warrant I've ever seen has had flaws, which then gets the thing thrown out. It's a pain in the butt. They don't like to get warrants. So warrant, or an exception to the warrant requirement, which are things like hot pursuit is a good one. So for example, if you're running from a police officer, for example, and your neighbor like opens their front door and is like, come here, and you run into your neighbor's house, and then your neighbor shuts the door, it's not like, aha, now you can't come in, right? Like you're in hot pursuit. They get to come into the house. So it's not like that type of like, hee hee. It used to be that when weed was more illegal than it is now in Oregon, they would say that the smell of burning weed was destruction of evidence. That burning of weed was destroying the evidence, so they could like stop you from burning the weed, right? Nobody's burning weed to get rid of it. I mean, they are, but they're not for that reason, right? But so there are some exceptions, but those are extraordinarily rare. They're very rare. The number one way that cops get into your things is by you giving permission to give them. And I have had clients who, for example, have been very, very addicted to drugs. And every time the cop pulls them over, stops them walking down the street, they give them, the cop, permission to go into their bag and find their drugs. And I've said, I keep giving you these know your rights. Why do you do this? And the answer they always give me is, I think they're going to find it anyhow. And they're really good at convincing us to do these things. Cops are very good. They get very well trained on how to get you to give permission to things. I always tell people that they're like vampires. Once you let them inside of your house, they will drain you of blood and life. So don't let the cops into your house or your trunk or your car. I have a mat outside my house that says the same thing my phone does. Get a warrant. Right? Like, no, go away. You can't come into my house. So don't let them search your car, your house, your person. If they say, get out of your car, I'm going to pat you down, you say, officer, I don't consent to the search, and you get out of the car. Particularly if you're a brown or black person, right? Like, we're not going to say we don't consent to searches and then make it very difficult, like then do something that's going to cause them to want to harm you. Just by acquiescing to the get out of the car order does not give them consent if you're saying I don't consent to this search. Which is a third random piece, which is those of us who are white and have access to power and privilege can do a small but important step of filming police interactions when we see brown and black people being pulled over by cops or arrested by cops. And that's because these nuances of who asked for an attorney, when they asked for an attorney, who asked, said I don't consent to a search, all of those things are up to the cops memorializing of a report unless there is video footage from those of us who have the power and ability to film that. So it's helpful to be able to have it on film that the cop, no, actually the person said I don't consent to the search, and they did that before you search them.
So is filming a police officer legal in the state of Oregon?
What was the first part of the question, sorry?
So is filming a police officer legal in the state of Oregon?
100% all the time. We're one of the states that has a law that says you can film police officers in their official duties. No problem whatsoever. If they say to you, back the hell up, or you're too close or something, what I suggest you do is you take one step back and continue filming. And if they say, get out of here, you're interfering with the policing, you take one step back. Just keep, don't interfere with what they're doing so that they don't arrest you and take your phone and destroy your phone as well. But you have a right to film them in their official duties. Most things have to. Mm-hmm.
You said like destroy your phone too. Isn't that destruction of evidence then? If they destroy your phone with a videotape or any type of.
Yeah, I mean, police officers are not supposed to destroy evidence, but I do a lot of I help connect protesters here in Portland with attorneys in light of all the protests, and we are seeing over and over again destruction of images or phones or random photos on phones that weren't supposed to be there, all sorts of things happening. They're not supposed to. There are apps you can download. The ACLU has one. Other people have them where you can film and instantly upstream, upload to the cloud. So if they do take your phone and destroy it or something happens, it's automatically uploaded elsewhere. There's a Driving While Black app that does the same thing. You say, I think to Siri or whoever lives in your phone, I'm being pulled over, and it immediately starts recording and uploading. So there are ways that you can make sure that you are always recording police interactions. You cannot, in Oregon, you can't record somebody on video without telling them that they're being recorded. You can always record one person over the phone, but there is an exception to law in Oregon that says you can film police officers, law enforcement. So that's the second thing. Officer, am I free to go? I don't consent to any searches. And then the third and probably most magical thing, it's as close to magic as we get in the law, is I want my lawyer now. It's probably the most important thing that you can say to law enforcement. You don't need to know a lawyer. You don't need to have a lawyer. You don't need to have a phone. You don't need to know any of, just those are magic words that what they're supposed to do is make cops stop talking to you, interrogating you until either you've got a lawyer with you or you sign a piece of paper, which you should never sign, that says, I know I originally said I wanted to talk to a lawyer, but now I'm going to be really dumb and I'm going to hurt myself and my case in the long run. And now I'm going to say I don't want to have a lawyer present, even though it's really a bad idea and I really shouldn't be signing this piece of paper. Don't sign the piece of paper. Don't sign pieces of paper. Just like you don't talk to cops, we don't sign pieces of paper unless you have a lawyer look at them. And I've had this happen once with an immigration case I had. I had a client facing criminal charges and he was completely innocent, and he got arrested by ICE at the courthouse when I was so mad. The judge's staff knew that ICE was there to arrest him, so they pulled me into judge's chambers to talk so that I couldn't be there when he got arrested. disgusting. But I found out he was a kid. I found out he had been arrested, and I actually found out where he was and got the ICE officer to put him on the phone with me. And I said, "Did you sign anything?" And he said, "Yeah, I don't really know." And I said, "Pull out the pieces of paper you signed and read them to me." And he read them to me, and I said, "Rip them up right now in front of me, put them in a stack and rip them in half." And the ICE officer was not very happy with me and never let me talk to him again. But don't sign papers. Don't sign papers. Don't sign papers.
Yeah, I would just echo that. Same for immigration. Ask for tell them you would like to speak with your attorney. It's a little bit different because you don't have a right to an attorney like you would in a criminal proceed. I mean, you have a right to an attorney that's if you're in deportation proceedings, but ICE often does not honor that right, and they ask the attorney to have something signed before we can talk to the client. So it's not like you can just say it and we're there. But they should not sign anything ever, and they should tell the ICE officers that they don't want to speak until they talk to an attorney. Because you could be just signing your deportation order, and that makes it really difficult, and they'll do anything, they'll trick people to signing it, and that's not, that's gonna screw you over, basically, you know? So yeah, you don't want to sign anything.
Yeah, so that's the third and magical thing. Officer, am I free to go? I do not consent to any searches, and I want to talk to my lawyer now. And you need to say that strongly and unequivocally. Saying things like, should I talk to my lawyer? Maybe I should call my mom. Do you think I need a lawyer now? Not strong enough. It needs to be a strong declaration that you want to have a lawyer. We used to tell people to say, I want to remain silent. You can say that if you want to. It doesn't actually give you a lot of protections because our Supreme Court is dumb, and our Supreme Court recently ruled that in order for you to exercise your right to remain silent, you have to say that you're remaining silent, which is antithetical to remaining silent, which is kind of whatever. So it's stronger for you to say, I want my lawyer now, and I'm not talking anymore, and then don't talk. And what they'll do is they'll put you in the back of the car, and they'll sit in the front of their car, and they'll talk mess about you to get you to say some things in the back of the car, but you're being recorded in the car, and they're certainly keeping track of you. So just don't take the bait. Like, it's not magic where you get to say, I want my lawyer now, and then I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Haha, now I can confess to things because I said the magic words. It doesn't work like that. You got to remain silent after that. That's the hardest part, is they're going to say some stuff, and they're going to be but you got to remain silent. I know we're getting there on time, so I'll speed up real quick. Just a couple of things about this. One, cops can lie to you. They can entice you to do things. They can tell you they have evidence that they don't have. They don't have to tell you what you're being charged with. They don't have to give you their badge number. Some police stations have rules that say that they're supposed to do that. But for example, Portland Police got permission from their boss to cover up their badges during protests. So you can't even identify them. They can perform illegal acts. They can do drugs with you. I represent a lot of sex workers, and sometimes sex workers think that what's called a handshake will keep them safe, which is they get into a car with a potential John, and they'll touch their genital region or have the John touch theirs. Cops can do that lawfully and, engage in illegal behavior to get you to give up evidence against yourself. This is Oregon specific. I don't know about Washington. I don't practice there. So but it's throughout the whole state of Oregon, the information I've told you. What else? What else am I missing? Oh, if you get to jail, don't talk on the jail calls. I can't tell you the number of times I've had the best case on the face of the planet, and then the night before trial, the DA drops a CD of jail calls on me, and my client confesses to everything to their girlfriend, and they think they're doing it in a clever way because they're talking roundabout, but it's clear that we're going down the next day at trial. Don't talk on jail phones, except to your lawyer.
I was just going to add a few really specific immigration related things. A lot of people work under false names and social security numbers. You should never have any false documents with you. You should also keep your immigration documents in a secure place in your house. You should never carry anything that has your country of origin on it. For instance, like some people have a matricular ID. Those things should all be in your house in a safe place, and the person should designate a family member or close friend that knows where they are. We recommend that people memorize the number of a family member that's their emergency contact in case they do get picked up by ICE, and that that person also knows what the contingency plan for kids is. ICE officers are notorious for not caring at all about what happens to kids and leaving people in really bad situations, you know, where their kids are coming home from school and the kid comes home and the parents aren't there. So, and then I guess the other thing is there's something called an A number that anyone who has had undocumented people who've had no prior contact with immigration wouldn't have an A number, which is where it becomes really difficult. But anyone who has had any prior contact with immigration or has immigration applications pending, or who has some sort of documentation like a legal permanent residence card, they will all have a 9-digit number that begins with A. That's their case number. It's really important that family members know that number, because one of the only ways to locate a detainee is by their country of origin and their A number once they're arrested. And ICE often sends people as quickly as they can. They'll deport somebody, especially someone who has a prior order of deportation and then re-entered the country. They'll deport that person as quickly as possible. So it's often really hard to get the person the legal help they need before that action is taken. So it's important that family members have that number at their disposal. Unfortunately, what happens sometimes is that if a person's undocumented or they were deported previously, but they don't have any files or don't know what the A number that was assigned to them was, the family members have a really difficult time locating them. And it's really, you know, obviously frightening for the family members to not know where that person is. So I guess those are just those are the immigration specific things. And again, to never tell anyone your country of origin, however many times they ask.
Going back to a question I had earlier, but we were talking about George things, which I thought George brought up a good question, but you said that Oregon isn't a state that requires you to carry an ID. Isn't that the entire United States that doesn't require you to have or show an ID when requested? Because that's what I was told all the time when I was in the military. And then I got assigned to Germany and they're like, the cop asks you for your ID, you better pull out your military ID, because that's the way they know that you're here for a specific reason.
So my understanding, and again, I'll look it up real quick, is that each state can make their own rules about that. So there are states I thought Texas is one, but let me, I can look it up real quick while we're talking about other things. There are, I believe, other states that require you to carry proof of identification. And yeah, I'll look it up real quick. The other thing I was going to add in terms of specific protester pieces, which is when you are engaging in protest, a lot of what you're doing when you engage in protest is intentionally violating the law. You are saying this law is unjust, or the application of this law is unjust. So I'm going to make the decision to protect other folks by intentionally violating the law. And your First Amendment is not, it's not like a get out of the charge free, you know, get out of jail free type thing. It's not where you get to say, well, because I was exercising my morals and my First Amendment, then I shouldn't be facing this disorderly conduct or this interfering with a peace officer. Your attorney can help craft that into an argument about why you may not be culpable of it, but you still have to disprove the elements of a crime. And so, for example, well, you don't have to disprove anything, but you really actually do. For example, in resisting arrest charges, passive resistance is not resisting. So for example, if you have decided that you and some folks are going to blockade something and police come and they give you an order to leave and you decide you're not going to leave and you just make your body go limp and you make it hard for them to get you out of there, that is passive resistance and it does not qualify as resisting arrest under the statute. There's certain things like that. Interfering with a peace officer, you have to have violated a lawful order. Whether or not the order is lawful is a big room up for debate that we fight a lot about in court. Whether you heard the order, whether it was clear. There are a bunch of different pieces that are defenses for you if you are engaging in protest. But know that just because you're engaging in protest, because you have the right to do so and because it's the moral thing to do, that alone is not a defense to the charges. It may be what we talk about to the jury, and it may be something that helps sway, but it's not in and of itself a defense. Does that make sense?
Wow, our time has just flown by. Everyone had really amazing questions, and I want to thank everyone for participating tonight to respond to the separation of families by ICE and to demand that we take action in defense of Black lives. Learning, practicing, and sharing these skills and de-escalation techniques is one big part of creating a world where everyone in our community is truly safe and our communities are truly welcoming for all.
Yeah, so please reach out if you have other questions that we didn't get to. We'll try and get you answers, and we'll do a follow-up email with a recording, and we can include an image of what a judicial warrant looks like compared to an administrative warrant, and any other links or resources that folks want to share in the chat as we're closing out. And also, if you're forming a group and want to join ROP's multiracial network, please reach out. We're happy to be on call to hash out plans of action or safety plans or anything else. We are here to support you. And there are 2 upcoming strategy sessions that we have planned. On Tuesday, September 1st from 6:30 to 8, we are bringing Ajamu Umi back, who we love working with, and he's going to be facilitating an honest conversation about how white supremacy works. So everyone's welcome to join that. And then the week after, on Thursday, September 9th, I live right next to the train tracks. On Thursday, September 9th from 6:30 to 8, we have bold creative actions for organizers with Dancer and some other incredible folks from our network. So go to rop.org/strategy session, and there might even be a train involved. We don't know. But thank you all. Yeah, again, just so much thanks and gratitude.
The training. I have
Thank you all.
a real quick question. May I?
And we can stay on for a few minutes for folks that
I want to know if the police have any duty to protect protesters.
No. I mean, they have a duty to uphold the law, and if they apply, but we know that doesn't happen. And if they are interrupting a protest to follow the law, they're supposed to do it in a content neutral way, which we also know they don't do. So if they're, like, for example, if there are Proud Boys and they're Antifa, hypotheticals never happened in Portland. I'm just come out of the corner of my brain thinking about this. They theoretically should be behaving to Proud Boys the way they are to Antifa. But they're not doing that. That's one of the major sources of contention, is that they are very clearly lined up to protect the Proud Boys, and doing that in all sorts of ways. They're texting with them ahead of time. They know that members of the Proud Boys have active warrants and have been told they're not allowed to be at protests, and they're still protecting them. They're not arresting them. They're even going up to the Proud Boys and saying, your boy, this guy inside the Proud Boys has a warrant, tell him to get out of here before he gets arrested. So, and they saw a video in Salem of them going up to some Proud Boys in Salem and saying, get inside before we have to arrest people. They're not supposed to do that, but there's a lot of things police are not supposed to do. Part of the whole system that supports them is that they don't get arrested or charged by DAs, and if they go to a grand jury, the district attorney protects them during grand jury, so they're never indicted. And it's almost impossible to sue police officers. They have qualified immunity, and you have to do a 1983 complaint, and those are really difficult and time intensive. Sorry, that's a lot of really Debbie Downer stuff at the very end.
We could probably spend hours on this topic. And again, I want to thank everyone for spending their evening with us, and our presenters and the folks that answered questions. Y'all are awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate you all very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Here's